Welcome and thank you for joining me for this webinar about the local meal charge policy, regulations and reality. My name is Kayla Macera. I am the Nutrition Program Specialist for the Southwest region in Missouri. Let's get started. To begin, this webinar includes a brief overview of important elements to consider when developing your local meal charge policy. I hope this acts as a warm-up to get you thinking more critically about your LEA's policy planning process. We will review each USDA requirement for the meal charge policy, and with each requirement, I will discuss recommendations made by the USDA, who provided their guidance and addressed common questions through Memo SP 23-2017. I also had the opportunity to interview multiple LEAs in Missouri and will share their experience and recommendations with the local meal charge policy. We will also be discussing additional regulations as it pertains to allowable sources of funding to manage debt and options for managing remaining and unclaimed funds. The USDA has 3 requirements for the local meal charge policy, but has left a lot of groundwork for each individual local education agency to determine how to develop an effective policy that will fit their community best. We will look deeper at each individual requirement and related recommendations. But before we start with the requirements, let's engage in policy development. A policy is a written plan or a course of action designed to influence and determine decisions. This is for both those who enforce and follow the policy to understand what steps will be taken if unpaid meal charges accrue. This table is from the Public Health Law Center at William Mitchell College of Law, who worked in collaboration with Kansas Foundation for Health to create a simple guide for drafting policies. This table offers a basic approach to think about any policy from scratch. It is important to identify key issues surrounding meal charges. Try to think about what your school community members are experiencing that is leading to unpaid meal charges. What are solutions that can be included in your policy to help address these findings? Clearly define any terms or procedures so there is no room for ambiguity. Also, think about the audience that the policy is distributed and tailor the language and readability to those who need to understand it. Consult with others for guidance, involve professionals and your community. It's a team effort. Exchange ideas, expect challenges, and evaluate your policy to inform necessary changes. This is for people who prefer a visual way of approaching a critical thinking challenge. This is something called a logic model. Logic models work like a map to explain how a program or policy will play out, using a sequence of connected events or activities, all working to achieve a goal. I'd like to illustrate this framework by using an example. The first box contains inputs or key players. For this example, inputs and key players include a team of people and technology. The second box contains activities that are to be completed by the inputs or key players. In this example, the key players may be solicited for their skill sets or abilities with technology to create a video to help adults complete a meal application. The third box contains outputs from the activities performed. After a video is created to help assist households complete a meal application, the tool is now reusable. Knowledge about and access to meal applications has increased, and the burden is lowered on your administrative staff. The two ovals contain short-term goals. The first short-term goal states that this LEA is anticipating a 10% increase in meal applications submitted. And another goal for this LEA is to decrease meal application processing time, since more applications are expected to be submitted more complete and correct. So now, with an increase in meal applications submitted and a decreased processing time, we arrive at the long-term goal of decreased meal charges and debt. I have learned that many LEAs struggle with the local meal charge policy, and I thought that offering this way of approaching the policy could help policy leaders work with their team members to determine challenges while also developing a clear understanding of the policy's purpose and goals. Since a lot of groundwork is left for your LEA to develop an effective policy, identifying stakeholders, establishing leadership and management, completing a needs assessment to identify gaps in current policy, and setting goals are some elements that may contribute to a successful policy. So now let's jump into the first requirement. The first requirement is to have a policy. All school food authorities operating the National School Lunch Program and/or the School Breakfast Program must have a local meal charge policy. It also must include the USDA's Food and Nutrition Services non-discrimination statement. The USDA provides some recommendations in Memo SP 23-2017 for the policy. First is to update and revise annually. Second are some options to avoid meal charges by setting up a prepayment system and to urge completing meal applications early. Alternative meals may also be an option to include in your policy, and there is an option to eliminate or reduce the reduced price category. We'll take a closer look at some of these options. Most LEAs allow prepayment for school meals. This helps to avoid meal charges. You are allowed to incentivize. For example, a discounted price is allowed for prepayment. However, the discounted price must be in compliance with the paid lunch equity guidelines. The prepayment system must still allow for a method to add funds on the day of service, i.e., cash payments the day of meal service. Funds also must be allowed to carry over into the next month and school year, or the money is to be refunded. For meal applications, encourage households to complete meal applications early. Prioritize this by getting as many applications in before the first day of school. The first day of the school year begins July 1st, and you may begin accepting applications as early as July 1st. Be transparent and remind households that they can complete meal applications at any time throughout the school year. Think about who you can involve in the policy that can help your LEA identify households experiencing acute financial setbacks. A school that I interviewed involves their school counselor with completing meal applications. The counselor also has identified students in households experiencing financial struggle and played a part in eliminating that household's chance of accruing meal charge debt. Alternate meals may be part of your local meal charge policy. You may offer reimbursable or non-reimbursable alternative meals, and both are different eggs to crack into. Let's start with reimbursable alternate meals. Reimbursable alternate meals must meet the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program dietary guidelines, appropriate meal patterns for grade groups, offer versus serve requirements, and pricing requirements. If you don't operate your programs under offer versus serve guidelines, or the alternate meal is provided in an inconspicuous way, like the sack lunch is given at the office to avoid lunch shaming, the meal must then offer all 5 components in full quantities to be considered reimbursable. Reimbursable meals are considered program food and are treated like a program food cost. The child may be charged for the reimbursable meal, or the school food authority may cover the cost of the meal under the child's respective meal benefit category. These are the current National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program dietary guidelines for the school year 2019-2020. School food authorities must always ensure that children with disabilities are accommodated and have access to the same benefits and services. Now let's talk about non-reimbursable alternate meals. If a student is charged for a non-reimbursable alternate meal, the meal is subject to Smart Snack guidelines. If the student is provided a non-reimbursable alternate meal at no charge, this cost must be recovered by non-federal funds to the school food authority. Non-reimbursable alternate meals are not considered program food or cost, so it's subject to revenue from non-program food guidelines. And under all circumstances, reimbursable or non-reimbursable alternate meals, the SFA must ensure that children with disabilities are always accommodated. If you are noticing that meal charge debt is accruing and mainly impacting households that qualify for reduced price meals, you may choose to provide meals at no cost to the household or reduce the price of the reduced price category. If your LEA chooses to practice this, the nonprofit school food service account may cover the cost or the cost difference between the charged price and the required price of each reduced price meal sold. The USDA recommends a thorough financial analysis prior to implementation to make sure your nonprofit school food service account is generating enough revenue to support this practice. The second USDA requirement is communication. The USDA requires that the SFA communicates their policy in writing with households and to anyone who plays a role in enforcing the policy. I have gotten questions previously if providing the policy via email to households would meet this requirement, and it does not. However, it couldn't hurt to additionally email households the policy as a way to make the policy more visible. The USDA recommends using existing forms of communication with households to provide the local meal charge policy. Pairing the policy with enrollment packets, back-to-school packets, and in-student handbooks are some examples that the USDA provides. After speaking with a few LEAs about their policy communication can and should go beyond USDA's recommendations and requirements in order to achieve an effective policy. Communication during policy implementation is seemingly the most important construct of this policy. This, along with commitment and teamwork, were some common themes I pulled from my interviews with local Missouri schools. A Missouri LEA reported in an interview that they begin consistent communication the moment a child has a meal charge. Communication is only done through parents. Weekly phone calls are made for any amount that is charged, and meal applications are sent weekly. They set thresholds of $25 and $50 in their policy. Households with charge totals of $25 receive a warning call that if debt reaches $50, debt will be turned over to a collections agency. The LEA has received positive praise by parents for the increased volume of communication by the LEA. To reiterate from the example used in the logic model earlier, an LEA created an instructional video to help households complete meal applications as a way to break down barriers for some folks. Some school nutrition professionals have shared with me that some parents feel intimidated and choose not to fill out the application because they don't know the difference between gross income and net income. Another LEA recommends to have conversations with your community and emphasized to make the conversation as non-threatening as possible. Learn about their needs and how you can meet your community at their point of need. For this LEA, through conversation, they learned that a household's point of need was that the school needed to hold post-dated checks and deposit throughout the year. Another LEA recommends that everyone should get involved. Many people may not understand food service operations. Be verbal to your board and administrators about the issue at hand. Everyone needs to know and contribute, and this may include the community. This particular community had no idea unpaid meal charges were an issue for this school. Once it was brought to light, support from the community poured in, and consistent partnerships to assist with unpaid meal charges have been established. As mentioned previously, another LEA involves their school counselors with unpaid meal charges to help identify underlying problems and may be there to help connect families with resources. Their school counselors also provide help to households by helping them complete meal applications. Communication connects us and helps us gain understanding. Use it to your advantage to avoid meal charges. Managing unpaid charges. Long-term payment plans may be part of your local meal charge policy. This may be set up after a certain amount of debt has accrued. You set and define that limit, but work with households to make it flexible and non-threatening. Unpaid charges may be carried over into the next school year, and communicating payment reminders must only be done through authorized persons. If debts have reached beyond a certain limit, the general school fund can cover unpaid charges. A local LEA decided to write off students who had accumulated debt that became eligible for free meals during the school year. An unexpected twist with this element of their policy was when someone reached a $50 threshold and was about to be turned over to the collections agency, but the household completed an application and qualified for free meals. The LEA ended up writing off their debt since it was part of their policy. Set and clearly define these limits in your policy. Talk to your community for donations, develop relationship or partnerships to form stable assistance. And if you decide that contracting with a collections agency is part of your local meal charge policy, consult with legal professionals before doing so. Reclassifying debt. It is up to the LEA to determine if efforts to collect debt becomes useless or too costly. The LEA mentioned previously just set the amount at $50 to turn over to a collections agency. From that point on, the collections agency is the main communicator, and funding for this service may not be sourced from the nonprofit school food service account. Allowable funding. LEAs may use general funding, revenue from non-program foods, or community donations to recover any bad debt that is considered a useless effort to recover. Remaining funds for reduced price student accounts. Households receiving reduced price meals must receive a refund. Your LEA must contact the household with an attempt to return any funds remaining in that student's account. Remaining funds for full-price student accounts. Households paying full price for meals have multiple options. They may elect a refund, donate funds left in their account, or transfer to a sibling's account. The USDA has an excess balance donation template that can be edited and utilized and will be linked to this presentation. Unclaimed funds. If the owner is due $50 or more, an attempt to locate the owner must be performed before remitting the property. A letter detailing the amount due to the owner and requesting a positive confirmation should be performed. And reporting any unclaimed property should be done through the Missouri State Treasurer, which is this link below on the bottom of the screen. Opportunity should be given to households with account balances to reclaim their money, and households approved for reduced price meals must still be given a refund. The third and final USDA requirement is record keeping. The School Food Authority must provide their local meal charge policy during the administrative review, and you must maintain documentation of all policy communication methods with households, collections agency, legal consult, and with personnel who enforce the policy. Retain documentation related to bad or delinquent debt, and it's highly recommended to evaluate your policy annually, and this documentation may help you in that process. To summarize, these are the USDA's 3 requirements for the local meal charge policy. The USDA has left a lot of groundwork for individual LEAs to discover what works best for their communities. Engage and communicate with your community, administrators, school professionals, and school nutrition professionals to approach this policy with a well-rounded team. Thank you for listening to this webinar. I would appreciate any feedback on this webinar, and I welcome any questions you may have regarding this topic. You may reach me by phone or email. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.